Welcome to the second Magic Gaming Esports Academy webinar presented by Florida Blue. I'm your moderator, Harris Rubenstein. I work for the NBA2K League. Been loving working with Magic Gaming this year. Congrats to them, by the way. Big win in the Steel Open this year. Got to the 3v3 championships, got to the 5v5 championships as well. So congrats to Magic Gaming. But today we actually have a man who is actually written in the history books of the NBA2K League, Dom Kallas, the VP of Esports at TSM. I'll just call him TSM, you know, the FTX. We had the whole thing. But Dom, you started with Gen G. I don't want to say started in esports with Gen G, but that's how we are familiar with each other. But I'm sure that your entrance into esports is much, much deeper than that. So I'll leave it to you. How did you get into esports in the first place? I'm sure you have mountains of stories. So where did you begin?
Yeah, Harris, thanks for having me, and thank you guys for putting this on. I think this is really cool. But a little bit on my background. So I went to college thinking that I was going to end up on Wall Street my entire life. So day one, I declared a major in econ and a major in finance. So I was like, these are the only skill sets that I need to be successful, and basically set the path that I was going to end up on Wall Street. And so that was great. Got about a bunch of experience there. But throughout my time in college, I basically did an internship with a really cool program in Salt Lake City, Utah, called the University Venture Fund, and got early exposure to VC investing, private equity investing. And I found out, like, hey, this is really cool. This is, a direction that I want to go. And so through that experience, I was able to skip having to go to investment banking, which is the bane of everyone who lives on Wall Street.
Thank God.
And, was able to skip that and go straight into private equity right out of college at a firm out in Boston that focused on sort of tech investing. And it was like old, boring technology. We're talking 1980s, like COBOL and banking technology, and it scares you when you find out what runs our U.S. financial system. But it was a cool experience, and got to work on a bunch of different projects, worked on a bunch of different sectors, worked and executed on basically combining a bunch of different companies. What private equity is: you go out, you buy these old sleepy companies, you take 2 or 3 of them together, you optimize all the business processes and operations, and turn it into something cool. And throughout my time there, we were basically working on a sector within like simulation gaming technology, with some old school Hollywood special effects sort of software.
Cool.
And then there was a VC guy on our team that was basically working on another gaming project, and that's where he's like, hey, I'm going to go explore esports, and I'm going to draft you, who's never done venture before, never done this other stuff, but like, let's go. And so it was a cool time. And at that time, TD Garden in Boston was having the LCS finals, and so we got to go see that live and really got to see esports in action. And it was a really cool project. And ultimately, what we ended up doing was spinning out the Samsung Esports division, which is in Korea, out from Samsung, and basically standing it up as its own standalone entity. Entered the Overwatch League at the time, and acquired a bunch of sort of small esports teams to start KSV, which then ultimately became Gen G. And throughout their whole time, they kind of grew and did a bunch of different things. And one of those things was entering the NBA2K League as the only esports group that, wasn't affiliated with, an NBA program. But as I was spending more time in the back end, sort of having helped with that project, the CEO was like, hey, do you want to come over and help run head of US operations? And I was like, yeah, it'd be an honor. So I moved out to LA, was out there for 4 years now, and kind of helped over the course of there, do a bunch of random different things. Everything from helping stand up the headquarters to helping improve software communications and helping with hiring and pay bands and all this sort of different stuff that's needed to help basically with the startup. And it was a really cool experience. But then, I got an opportunity from TSM. They basically came knocking on my door. And, when the largest esports org in the world comes knocking on your door, it's a pretty loud knock. And so took the opportunity there late December, early January this year, to basically be their VP of Esports and oversee all of their esports teams. At the time was 19, and all of their content creators. So today I've whittled that down a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, wow.
Yeah. So trying to kind of add a little bit more of like a direction of like, hey, what is TSM? And that'll take more time, but like basically have gone from there of taking 19 teams. I think we're down to around 13. So cutting a bunch of those down, but just like really helping people focus on like, hey, these are the games that we're in. This is what we're doing. And then continuing to look to evaluate to enter in new titles. And I know a lot of people probably on this call think it's like, oh, hey, my job in esports is to sit around the table with my GMs and we talk strategy all day long. I do 1% of that. So the rest of my day is like, hey, making sure that contracts are current, making sure that, we're hiring appropriately, making sure that we're bringing on new team managers, making sure contracts are signed and are correct, making sure we're signing under the right legal entity if we're signing a content creator. People will come, people will go, supporting my GMs when they decide, hey, we need to make roster changes, we need to do all these sort of things. So instead of just operating one team, you're operating 13 different teams, all with different goals and objectives, and communicating that to sales teams and to the executives and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I do now on a day-to-day basis. And even then it's working with partners outside of that as well, without just side of the org. So we're in a bunch of different leagues, like the LCS with League of Legends. And so this weekend, I'm flying to Chicago. Our team didn't make the grand finals, but it's literally sitting on panels, working with Riot, helping shake hands with their partners. Like, yeah. Like, just like basically you go around to all this sort of stuff, and you literally are just the face of the org, and your job is to help your partners and help other partners help their partners, and that's what it's all about. So that is a long-winded way of saying that's how I got into esports. That's kind of what I'm doing now, but I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into the tumultuous trek that got me here. It's not a single path. It took many different turns along the way.
Hey, the Chicago part of your job, that's where it gets fun, right? The competition's over, you just get to hang out, schmooze a little bit. That's the fun part of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I think it's something that I didn't realize about business travel until you get older, is that while you're supposed to be at that dinner, you also have like 4 other assignments that we're technically supposed to get done. So you're supposed to be having a call with your GM about, a new Rocket League team, and you got to be talking to this partner to make sure that certain terms were included in the contract, all while you're supposed to be out thinking about, what you're supposed to actually be there for, and that whole thing too. And it's never as much as like, oh, hey, I just get to relax, have a beer, have a good time. But it makes the job challenging, but it also makes it fun and engaging, and why I love getting up every day and doing that.
So before we get into the TSM stuff, which seems to have a huge umbrella of esports that you're getting into, back to the Gen G side of things, that's a massive brand to just kind of like, that's your entrance into esports. Like, welcome to esports. Here's Gen G. Like, that's a pretty crazy entrance into it. It sounds like they gave you a lot of responsibility. I mean, your arms were all over the place. What was the part of the job that you were least expecting when you got it? Like, what was the part of it that just kind of hit you in the jaw and you're like, whoa, did not see that coming?
Yeah, I think a big part of it was like, there was this general thesis that, hey, Korea is very, very good at esports. That's where, esports was born and all that sort of stuff. And ultimately coming in and just having an executive team be like, hey, we actually got everything set up in Korea. Now we want you to help connect everything, and you're going to be working with Korean, employees, and also we're going to probably stand up an office in China as well. So I hope you're prepared to work with that as well. And like, all of a sudden, like, the multilingual and multi-country differences is really, really, it's crazy. But like, as most large esports groups grow to be more global, you find out that there's a lot of intricacies that come with, working internationally. I'm sure, like, even you guys are realizing that with, as the NBA2K grows, as the NBA grows, right? You're working with teams that are inside of Toronto, that are working inside of South America, that you're dealing with all these sort of things, that it's not just getting on a plane and going to Toronto. It's like, hey, if you're getting paid for being X amount of days inside of Toronto, you got to file different, like, tax forms and all these different things. And certain players need visas if they're not a North American citizen, and all these sort of weird, complex things that come with working in different countries is like super, super challenging. So. Uh-oh, someone needs to unmute Harris.
There we go. That was my own fault. I went to cough and I hit the wrong buttons. Let's keep talking about Gen G because you spent 3 years there, and
Yep.
we'll get into 2022 here, but that was the part that you were at least expecting. I think the international aspect of esports in general is one of the coolest parts. We see it in the 2K League a lot. We're such a diverse esports, so many backgrounds and countries. So I guess, what is the coolest place that it's taken you in terms of location? Maybe there's some sort of esports event that kind of like really clicked it for you. Like, was there a moment where you had the job at first where you're like, I'm completely sold on esports. Like, I'm sold. This is it. Like, there was an event for me. I've had a couple. Was there one for you?
Yeah, so I think at Gen G, it was definitely going to South Korea to just like work with my colleagues and employees for 2 weeks, and like
Cool.
really just going there beyond just like a vacation, right? Like, it's like, hey, having to go into an office into a totally new area and figure your way around and all that sort of stuff was really, really cool. At TSM this year, I got the opportunity to go to Stockholm for a Dota 2 major, and just hearing a
Ooh,
whole
whoa,
like
that's
stadium
awesome.
filled, yeah, just having a whole stadium filled and that going crazy. And actually, I got the lucky opportunity when I was still at Battery. So even before Gen G, I went to the World's Finals for League of Legends when it was in Paris, and I actually got to go with my mom, and so that was like a
Oh,
cool
wow.
experience, and like showing her like this is what it's about, and like her eyes opening is like, oh my gosh, there's a whole stadium of people chanting here, all that sort of stuff. It was really, really cool. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
I would still say the in-person aspect of esports has to be like the best overall part of it. And I have to
100%.
imagine we can actually talk a little bit about that, because you've kind of had an executive role during the whole going into COVID and then coming out of COVID. Obviously,
Yeah.
COVID is still a very prevalent part of society, but as an executive, it must have posed a lot of different challenges for you. I want to say your favorite part of having to navigate through it, because I don't think anybody had a real favorite part, but like, what was the most interesting challenge that you faced through as an executive through all the COVID shenanigans?
Yeah, so we actually had a really interesting opportunity at Gen G. So our LA headquarters was on the bottom floor of EA Games, but it was
Mhm.
also kitty corner next to Nike's new building that Nike literally started building as we were going into COVID. When they started that whole process and when they basically got closed, they were like, shoot, we did not plan and we need more space. And so they offered like probably a month or two as we're going into COVID to buy us out of our location.
Oh,
And they're
wow.
basically like, we will give you X amount of money. Please move out as soon as possible. But that then meant that I had to go with our CFO during COVID, and we're like fully masked up and like had to go do office tours. And so we had to tour 23 different places around LA. We finally found like a standalone location that we were able to work in. And so it was literally the two of us. We did that whole process, and then I basically had to help assist a move of headquarters with just me, because no one else was allowed to like come into the headquarters, no one else was allowed to be around, and get basically an office set up while everyone was masked up and all that sort of stuff, for that no one was going to be there, right?
Mhm.
So really interesting challenges logistically that would have come into place otherwise, like having to plan and get special permits of like having more than 10 moving people in a certain area and all these sort of things, and like having cops come and stop by us when they were getting really, really strict and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting challenge. I think the part that like probably we saw at the NBA 2K as well, it helped a lot with viewership, right? Like
Yeah.
people were inside, people were watching stream, people were watching video games, people were playing video games. It helped a lot from that aspect, but it also took away from the part that a lot of people enjoy most about esports, which is the in-game live audience perspective as well. So you see these major championships and nobody's there and it's just on stage, and you're like, it just doesn't feel the same, right? And
Yeah.
so it was a lot of give and take. But everyone ran into challenges, but a lot of them were much worse than what I had to deal with. So I consider myself blessed and lucky for that as well.
Yeah, I had to do the whole location scouting thing as well, but it was just to find a new apartment. It was
Yeah.
chaos. You just had the gloves on, like the huge mask. I'm driving a U-Haul down a tiny Hoboken street. Sounds like you might have had a little bit of a better time than I did.
Yeah, and I will say the restrictions that the NBA 2K League kind of put on the teams definitely made it difficult as well, right? But like,
Yeah,
it was really, really cool to see though that they put the same amount of resources to those teams as they did, their NBA teams, right?
yeah, all the testing and
So
everything.
granted, it wasn't at the same level as the WNBA League, which I think was down in Florida at
Mhm.
what's the big academy that you guys have down
Is
there?
it IMG?
Yeah, IMG.
Yeah.
So they ran everything out of IMG. I thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
But still, like for them to send testers to every single NBA 2K team, for the guys to get tested on a regular basis, like put the resources to make sure everyone was staying safe, was like really, really cool.
Yeah, I thought the way that the NBA handled it ended up being very professional and appropriate, however uncomfortable it may have ended up being.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the now, because TSM is such a vital brand to esports, right? Like you can't really talk about esports without talking about TSM. So many great players have kind of come through it, and you have this. I mean, you have a big title, and you're the VP of Esports. Like that is not some little thing here. Like that carries a lot of weight to it. So I suppose, do you understand the weight and the kind of the gravity that comes with your role and the amount of impact that you can have? And what do you feel like has been like the most rewarding part of being able to kind of wield that sword?
Yeah, definitely. To tell you the truth, I think it signals a big change in the organization's like mindset and how things are done within the org, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say there was a lot of growth of TSM probably from like 2018 to 2020. And with that growth came a lot of growing pains, right? But at the same time, you got to remember, like TSM was started by Andy Din and his brother, which are basically he was a pro player that was smart enough to turn the business into one of the biggest esports orgs in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But really starting here, end of 2020, beginning of 2020, end of 2021, beginning of 2022, he finally like got to the point where he's like, hey, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to bring in some executives here to help run the org and make sure this is like run professionally the way that, at the time valued like like $500 million business should be run, right?
Right.
And so it wasn't just myself. It was I was come in to basically be the sole focus on the esports side, the esports division, and allow Andy to focus on the tech and business side.
Right.
And then we had Luke Kim come in, who was a CFO at a bunch of different financial tech startups before. He's come in as like a really head financial lead. We had Michelle come in, who was a head HR lead. She used to lead HR at SpaceX and a bunch of other sort of like really cool tech companies. We had SM come over. She was a former marketing lead or head of growth over at 100 Thieves, another big prominent name in the ecosystem, and kind of came over to TSM. And then we had Eric, who basically used to be the head lead of merch at FaZe Clan, which is obviously another big brand. And so
yeah, heavy.
So it was a big group of heavy hitters that kind of all came in at the same time that, it was finally at the point where it's like, hey, we're ready to have some real executives kind of leading the organization here going forward. Now, does that fix all the growing pains? No, but it's really cool that you have, that you're sitting next to some really cool, smart people that know what they're doing. And so it's nice to be able to lean on some people and lean on that experience that other people have as well, to build out a really strong cohesive team.
From an esports perspective, since you're kind of more like running things versus being like on the ground, like really, the gritty GM stuff. Do you miss like kind of being more in the thick of it? Do you like kind of this more overarching role? Like I'm sure they both come with their own challenges and late nights, but I have to imagine that you must have preferred one of them.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing about sports is we all love the competition. We all love, the thrill that comes with winning. But the hard thing about being in this role, being in your role, being, the head of the Magic, is that your future is very highly controlled by a bunch of 17 to 25-year-olds that are outside of your control, right? Like you can do only so much until game day, and then at the end of the day, it's their job to play. And then it is what it is, and leave
You're
it
not
all
holding
out
the
on the court.
Yeah.
Exactly. So for me, I get to be a little bit separated from that again, because like at the end of the day, like a lot of what I'm doing is helping my GMs be set up for success so that they can focus on just being a GM and just, picking up players, cutting players, having those discussions with coaches, working on performance, figuring out ways to continue to improve the player experience and behavior. But at the same time, like, man, when we're in a grand finals and like it's coming down to it and like everyone in the stadium is chanting, like I feel it just as much as everyone else on the team does. And so it makes it super exciting, but at the same time it can be hard. It's no longer fun when it's your team. I really do have to say, when you're no longer just watching for, hey, I want a good game, it's like, no, I want to destroy them and I don't want it to look close, and so we can move on to the next opponent.
This might sound like a silly question then, but like, how much does winning matter? Like, obviously you want to win, right? You want the trophies, but like, does winning a certain amount equal, like, it's easier for you to get sponsorships, or is it easier for you to like sales? Like, does winning actually matter on the business side of things, or is it really just for like the fans and the entertainment factor and all, the glory and whatnot? Like, how much do those things correlate?
So I think in esports, it definitely does matter. So
Okay.
esports isn't at the point where you necessarily have like, a league or, a system that basically supports everybody in the ecosystem. It really is, what you kill sort of mentality.
Okay.
So winning does help. Now, granted, if you're not able to tell storylines, if you're not able to help promote partners throughout that winning, then it becomes a harder thing to do, right? So I wouldn't say that initially, if an esports org is getting in, if you're winning a lot early on, it definitely makes things easier. But then to maintain that success up at the top, you got to kind of set yourself apart from everybody else, right? And that's even something that TSM is going through right now. Is like, hey, outside of League of Legends, what is our brand, right? And we've been able to do that with Valorant and Apex and some of these other titles, but it's hard shifting away from that, right?
Right.
And so being able to get consistent wins in these other games is able to help with that process. But it's not the end all be all, right? Like I've seen a bunch of like winning orgs win consistently, but have no reason for fans to care about the players, to care about the storylines, for partners to be associated with them, and it just those wins get passed by the next win is what is most important, right?
Right.
Where if you can have a strong marketing team that can capitalize on those wins and games that matter, it can really take you somewhere far.
So then I mentioned at the start that this is you get a chance to make a take. So you get two takes. What is the best esport and what is your favorite esport? Because you talk about like I'm sure you don't root for specific of your teams to win, but like, come on, you have to have your favorites. What's your favorite?
So my favorite is Valorant,
Okay.
but it's actually really funny because my actual playing of the game is extremely limited. So
yes,
I've played other games before, but again, at the end of the day, I'm not a gamer, right? Like my core background is a business guy, and so. But at the same time, like I've played enough of certain games that I understand how the mechanics work and understand, how to play a game. But I played the first 10 like promotion rounds of Valorant when the game came out in beta. I lost every single one. I'm like, I'm done. I'm not playing this game. But I've really grown to just I've grown to love the like competitive nature around it, how the game is played and the complexity. So I will in the middle of the night turn on a high school match with no commentating on it and just watch guys running around the field and basically playing icebox, how to do different runs, how to do different shots like that. And my license plate says Valorant, and I tune into every single one of our games, and like I absolutely love the game. I cannot play it to save my life, and it is what it is.
We're getting to that age, unfortunately. There comes a point where everybody's just cracked, and you're too old, and your thumbs can't keep up. It's okay.
100%. So I'd probably say that is my favorite.
Okay.
And then my hot take is that actually the best esport out there is Melee, Super Smash Brothers.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is because it's a 1v1 fighter. There are very few games left like that. I think, StarCraft is out there, but I think StarCraft is really hard for a lot of people to grasp if you don't understand the full complexities around it. Melee is still very much of like, there are moves that have been around for 15 years. The game has never changed. They're continuing to play, and they continue to find new ways to make improvements on the game and how to play a certain, combo set and all this sort of stuff. So I have a high level of admiration for that game. And the big reason for that is also because the developer is actively trying to kill the game and its ecosystem.
Yes,
and
I
so
know.
it's self-funded. It's run by players. It's run by fan support. And I think at the core, like that's what makes us love gaming. And that's what makes it so exciting. Because like even in the NBA, like there are a lot of kids who will be like, hey, I don't think I'll ever be able to get to the NBA, but I just want to go be able to, play basketball in the backyard with my friends and do it at its most raw and most core. And so I think it always becomes really cool. Now, if you're talking about like full-fledged stadiums, yes, you go a CSGO major, a League of Legends World Championship. But like if you're just talking about like if I had to pick one, what is the best is Melee and what is my favorite is Valorant.
Best Melee. I did not expect that one. I love the reasoning though, because you're right. Like without the parent company like really showing a lot of love to the esport itself, it's hard to really get the most out of it. But it is incredible that Melee is still going. I personally have an affinity for fighting games in general, just because like there's such a crazy community around them. And you saw it at Evo the other day, the cell scream, like just like those, it's like the little things in fighting games that really clinch me over. Let's switch gears here, because one of the main tenets of our academy here is the mental health side of things. And you have an interesting perspective, because you're kind of the head of the snake, right, when it comes to different workplace cultures and kind of how these things kind of trickle down. So from a mental health perspective, how do you kind of help manage such a large company? Like, I don't know how many employees you have under you. I imagine it's a lot. So how do you make sure that like that they're ready to go, that they're feeling good, that they're locked in, while also making sure that you're covering all those bases? Because it's a delicate balance. So kind of how do you manage all those things?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. It's a really complex situation. When I joined, there were about 150, and now we're probably closer to 100. And a big part of that is just like cleaning up, right? Like, hey, does it really align with us to have a simulation racer on our org? And like, what does that mean to TSM? And like, you have to make all these sort of decisions, right? So, but we're finally starting to get to the point where it's like, hey, the teams that we have now, the content creators that we have now and are adding soon, is kind of where we're going to kind of net out. It's like, this is TSM and this is what we want to promote for the next 2 years. But with that, like, for better for worse, you actually treat different teams differently, right? Our tier one teams, so that's League of Legends, that's Valorant, probably soon to be CS:GO, Dota, they get treated in a certain way where the games are so much bigger and the audience is so much bigger, the prize pool is so much bigger, that you need to set a level of performance and mental health and like all these other core initiatives that go with helping supporting a top tier game, right? But with that being said, there's also a bunch of teams that we have, like say our Fortnite guys, right? I have 2 Fortnite guys that are 15 years old. They're still going to high school, right? And so from that whole perspective, like,
man, I'm old.
it's totally different, right? And so it's not possible for us to basically have a sports psychologist or these other resources to these guys, because they're still living with their parents at home, and it's a totally different dynamic, right? But let's dive into like, what do we provide for our tier one, and like, what do people usually hear about? So I would say, from a performance basis, we even had a call earlier today on this with a performance company, is view esports today probably where the NBA was like in the late 1970s. So we are still nowhere close to where NFL teams are, to where NBA teams are, where they basically have gotten so good at mastering their craft and figuring out player health with like blood work and like full like medical staffs on team and all these sort of things. Esports is not close there. We're getting there. We're just starting those things now. But those are for our tier one teams. And that basically comes down to the basis of a lot of teams over the last few years have moved into performance centers or like headquarters, right? And in those places, they're able to provide chefs, which provide, lunch and dinner meals. Is it necessarily going to be like gourmet food? No, but it tends to be like, hey, if we can regulate that they're getting more vegetables per day, if we can regulate that they're eating healthier than just ordering Chipotle every day, that's a big win for us, right? In our headquarters, we have a full setup gym. Does that mean that every single player is coming in and jacking weights every morning? No, but it basically means that, there is the capability there for when players, especially on our league team, if they're like super high stress, like they just need to run it out for 15 minutes. Great. They're not running 2 miles. They're just needing to run it out for a little bit and work that out. Now, where you said about like mental health, this is super important for us, because there tends to be less of a focus on like player injury and player like stamina through weightlifting and those dynamics, just because it's less physical, right? So a lot of it comes down to sleep and mental health overall. So for our main teams, we have a sports psychologist that basically sets up regular calls with our top tier teams to talk through issues, whether it's performance blocks, whether it's having issues with team dynamics, all these sort of things. Then some of these top players will also get their own personal like therapist, right? Like, which is a totally different thing than a sports psychologist. Sports psychologist is specifically there to help you with team performance. Therapist is there to help you with personal issues that are going on in your own life, right? But then we also have a heavy focus on sleep. So as you see, I'm wearing a Whoop band today. And what Whoop basically does for a lot of our top tier teams is basically track the number of sleep that they're getting and the sleep efficiency that they're getting. Tracks respiratory rate, tracks all these sort of things that are highly important to, you know, a top team performing well. Because what we've actually found is like, it doesn't matter as much if a player is, you know, working out every day or is doing all these sort of things. It's a higher indicator of success is actually the processing power in their mind, which is mostly determined through sleep schedule and regular sleep. So this is like where we're getting to, and this is just the beginning and the infancy of it. Like I can say at Gen G, we weren't even at that point yet, right? Like we were, like TSM has just basically started that over the past couple of years. There's a few other orgs that have started on that, but like it's a slow moving process. But this is starting as players are getting away from the old system of everyone living in a player house. Players are finally living in their own apartments, commuting to an office, dealing with regular performance staff on a regular day-to-day basis. And this is something that's a new development here over probably the last 3 or 4 years, you know, that just started right before COVID.
Are there, and this one I'm going to try to word this correctly. Do you have to manage different esports athletes differently? Like, do you have to manage somebody who does like a first person shooter differently than like a 2K player versus like a Rocket League player? Like, take me into that a little bit. Why do they, what's the differences?
Definitely. I think someone brought it up today and I want to steal their example. So look at Tiger Woods versus Jimmy Fowler. I think, or was it Rob Daly? Who's the one that like, one of the golf players that like, smokes
John Daly. Oh yeah,
John Daly. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So look, John Daly is a good enough golf player that he is still on the PGA Tour. Is he out winning every single weekend? No, but he's competitive. But guess what? He's smoking. He's overweight. He doesn't care. He just has natural skill and is very good, right? Same thing in esports. We have within the same team, we have certain young players that are just mechanically cracked, right? Like they don't, like they practice 24/7, they work out, they're super good at what they do. But then we also have some older guys on the team that, guess what, they got to just come in and grind, and they got to, if they're not putting in, you know, 60-70 hours within a week to get better, they know that their performance will fall off. Where some of these young guys, like they'll come in, they'll practice for a couple hours and they'll be ready to go, and you know, they'll drink a Red Bull and they're like, all right, let's go, right? Where, you know, these other guys, like they got to watch their sleep, they got to watch their diet, there's a lot of things that matter. And then the same thing that like there's some players that really are on the basis of like, hey, I actually don't want to stream because I don't want to give away certain skills or techniques or all that sort of stuff. And then we have like one of our Apex players, Imperial Hal, who's like such a like hard competitive athlete mentality that he's like, I want to stream every single one of my games. If you try to come in and stream snipe me, I will kill you. I'm better than you. You know, he just like, the dude is alpha as can be. And so there's different ways of thinking about that as well. But that's what makes it hard for coaches, right? Like this is where we got to bring in our coaching staff to help sort of balance all of those factors out, understanding how players work together, team dynamics, all those sort of things, which sometimes can be a more important factor than necessarily even being, you know, the best player on the team. Like we've had players who are some of the best in the world, but if you can't play with your teammates in a way that leads to overall success, like you're not going to last long on a team.
Yeah, you're going to have issues. And, you know, we've seen that in the 2K League side as well, where you can have as much individual skill that you want, but if you just don't have that ability of teamwork and accepting help as well, and also being accountable, then a lot of the times you're going to end up suffering. I could ask you questions for the rest of the night, but to save everybody's Wednesdays, I'll hit you with one or two more, and then we'll close things out here. So look, you've had a monster 2022. I mean, joining TSM, the work that you've been doing already, the work that it sounds like you have to come is going to be pretty cool. So I'll give you a cheesy question here. So what is one goal you hope to achieve to close out 2022?
Yeah. So right now we're going through, So right now we're going through the Valorant partnership process, which is basically, think of it as like the NBA hadn't been started and they were taking applications of who should be in the NBA. That's what we're going through right now with Valorant. It's a highly competitive process with a lot of other North American orgs. And so my one goal, which will hopefully we'll see if it comes into fruition here over the next 3 weeks, is to be accepted to the Valorant Partnership Program and get a championship winning roster signed to cap off 2022. That would be a successful goal for me.
I feel like the next time I see you in person, you're just gonna have a big Valorant tattoo right across
Hopefully.
your forehead.
Hopefully,
You got the
yeah.
license plate already. Now you're gonna get this. Well, Dom, thank you so much for doing with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We could go on and on. Sounds like you've had a pretty incredible career so far. Sounds like you got a lot to come though. So congrats to you, sir. I'm excited to see what you do. Any final words for the webinar?
No, I really appreciate the time. But I think the one thing that I did want to kind of give back is thank you everyone that did show up for the call. Really appreciate, love sharing my my history, my expertise, and kind of helping give back in any ways that I can. I think the one big hopeful takeaway that you guys got from today's conversation is that I got into esports through finance and econ, right? Like I did not go I wasn't a gamer. I didn't go get a degree in esports. If you really do want to get into esports, if you do want to get into gaming, I highly recommend that, you go out, you go to college and you get a certain skill set, whether that's marketing, whether that's graphic design, whether that's, business, that could be, even legal work or, accounting, anything like that. Build a desirable skill set and then take that into any industry that you want to go. Every industry needs those core skill sets. And so I think just making it understanding is like, this is not necessarily where, probably Harris or I, planned that we were going to be 10 years ago, but life takes you on unexpected paths. And so as long as you have a good base of education, you have a good knowledge base, you can basically go into any industry that you want and speak to them how your skill set will drive value for them at the end of the day. And ultimately, that's what's most important. So I hope through my story that's kind of what came off, and hopefully you guys can take that away.
Well, hey, I like the legal side of things. Lord knows that esports needs more lawyers.
Yep, exactly.
Well, Dom, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the VP of Esports at TSM, Dominic Kallas, former 2K League executive as well with the Gen G side of things. So nice homely character for us here at the NBA. But Dom, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys. We have another episode coming on the 28th, I believe, 3 Wednesdays from now. So be there, be a lot of fun. And for now, we'll see you guys. Dom, thank you.
Thank you.